I just finished watching a Netflix special about the disappearance of Amy Lynn Bradley. Today, I want to discuss the new revelations the new documentary revealed and things that I uncovered in my research that the special did not include. Hi, I'm Denise with Fascinating Cases. The disappearance of Amy has haunted me for years. I want to know if she's still alive. Let's get into the details, and I'll tell you what I think happened at the end. Amy Lynn Bradley was very close with her family, her mom and dad, Iva and Ron, and her younger brother, Brad. It was 1998, and Amy was 23 years old. She just graduated college from Longwood University in Virginia. Ron Bradley was just gifted a cruise from the insurance company where he worked. It was like a reward from his boss. Ron suggested the whole family go. It would be one last hurrah before Amy went off to the real world. Brad was 21, and he was all for it. But Amy hesitated. She was excited to start a new job that she just got in computer consulting, and she also just adopted a little puppy. Amy was very athletic and a good swimmer, but she wasn't crazy about the idea of being on a giant floating boat in the middle of the water. She was a bit afraid of heights, too. But Amy went, and she was glad she did at first. It was a Caribbean cruise starting in San Juan, Puerto Rico, with stops including Aruba and Curacao. It was a Royal Caribbean international cruise ship, about 1 year old, and it was called Rhapsody by the Sea. And it had about 11 decks and could hold around 2,400 people on board. The family gathered in San Juan, ready to board the ship. The Bradleys would share a suite, so they were all in one room together. The ship was beautiful, and Amy began to relax. On March 21st, 1998, the ship set sail for Aruba. The first couple of days were full of sun and swimming and dining, and on March 23rd, the Bradleys got all dressed up and attended a formal dinner on board. The Bradleys noticed at dinner that the waitstaff was paying special attention to Amy. They even asked her if she wanted to join them at a bar when they docked in Aruba. Amy said no, and said the waiters even gave her the creeps. A photographer was going from table to table taking pictures of the guests, and those pictures would then be pinned up for passengers to look over and buy them if they want to. When Amy and her mother, Iva, went to look at the photos, every single picture that had Amy in it was gone. Even the photographer thought that was odd. After the formal dinner on March 23rd, Amy and Brad and their parents went to the upper deck to enjoy a party with dancing and music. Ron and Iva called it a night around 1:30 a.m. Brad and Amy kept partying at the ship's club, which was still open. They met some people and were hanging out dancing. Amy was dancing with the bass player from the ship's house band, a man named Alistair Douglas, but everyone called him Yellow. Around 3:30, Brad went back to the family cabin, followed shortly by Amy 5 minutes later. The times they entered the cabin were recorded on the computerized door lock system. Amy and Brad sat on the balcony and were talking for a bit. Then Brad went to bed, and Amy decided to stay on the balcony, maybe sleeping on a lounge chair in the fresh air. We know this because her dad, Ron, woke up between 5:15 and 5:30. He looked around for his children. He saw Brad sleeping in his bed, and he saw Amy's legs on a chair on the balcony. And he went back to sleep, thinking all was well. When he woke up again around 6 a.m., Amy was gone, along with her cigarettes and her lighter. Her shoes were still on the balcony. Ron got dressed and looked around the ship's common areas for Amy, but he couldn't find her. Around 6:30, he went back to the cabin and woke up Brad and Iva, and he was getting very worried. The family sought out the ship's security for help, but they didn't get much. The Bradleys asked for a PA announcement over the ship's loudspeaker, but the captain said no. It was too early, and the ship's personnel didn't want to disturb or alarm the passengers. The ship was pulling into Curacao, and the Bradleys knew that this was bad. People would be getting off the ship. They believed Amy was still on the ship and not overboard at that point. They wanted the ship thoroughly searched before people disembarked, but the captain again said no. There were over 2,000 paying people on board, and they were going to stick to the schedule. In Curacao, the crowd got off the boat to sightsee and enjoy the island. The Bradleys had no idea if Amy was with the crowd or still on the boat. Around 8 a.m., an announcement was finally made on the ship's loudspeaker. Will Amy Bradley please come to the purser's desk? And that was it. The Bradleys were not getting anywhere with the crew. The captain was even hesitant to distribute flyers that had Amy's picture on it. But finally, flyers were handed out and taped on the cabin doors. The crew also began a search of the ship. I can't imagine how distressed the Bradleys were at this point. Amy was nowhere to be found. The Bradleys didn't know what to do. Get off the boat? Stay on the boat? They were told the ship was leaving Curacao that night. The Bradleys got off the boat, and the ship sailed on to St. Martin. The captain of the cruise ship was calling Royal Caribbean headquarters to get the company lawyer on board to be involved in all communications going forward. Because the ship was in international waters, U.S. laws would not apply. It wasn't like the Wild West, but the U.S. could not really get involved. The boat was registered in Norway, and those laws would apply. The captain was the one in charge. The Bradleys needed to get the FBI involved because that agency can investigate when U.S. citizens are involved. They contacted the American Embassy in Curacao for help, but still, the FBI had limited access. Like, for example, Yellow was a serious suspect, but he could not be detained by U.S. authorities. The ship's authorities were leaning toward a fall overboard. Amy was drinking after all. But she didn't like the open water. And why would she jump or even accidentally fall overboard? She would have had to climb over the railing or move furniture to get over it. An ocean search for Amy was underway. Dutch authorities were searching by water and helicopter. If Amy fell overboard in the water, it would be shallow where she fell over because the ship was close to the Curacao port. The searchers had a targeted area to go over, but found nothing. Officials in Curacao said if Amy was in the water because of the current, she would eventually wash up on the shore. But the Bradleys believed Amy was still on the boat or taken off against her will. Computerized door lock system that logged entries did not log exits from the rooms. The Bradleys believed Amy left the room sometime after 5:30 in the morning. Then 2 women on the ship came forward, saying they saw Amy that morning between 5:30 and 6 a.m., and she was with Yellow, the band member. The women were sitting on a deck chair when they saw Amy and Yellow get into a glass elevator, and they exited on the same floor as the club, which was then closed. They saw only Yellow come back down. The FBI was allowed on board in plain clothes to search the ship. Officers looked over the Bradleys' cabin room. A spokesperson for Royal Caribbean said the FBI found furniture moved toward the balcony, and there was a footprint on a table. The FBI said no such report was ever made, which is interesting. Sadly, the Bradleys flew back home to Virginia on March 28th without their daughter. Alistair Yellow Douglas, who was seen dancing with Amy on March 23rd, was still a suspect. Brad said he got too friendly with Amy and she put him off. Yellow said they danced until about 1 in the morning and then he left. But a videographer on board had footage of the two dancing until at least 3 a.m. Besides, Iva and Ron were still with their children that night up until 1:30, so the times just aren't matching. Supposedly, Yellow approached Brad and said, "I'm sorry about your sister," the next morning. And that was before the announcement was made. Maybe word of mouth was traveling amongst the crew members. We just don't know. Yellow was questioned and polygraphed. Results were inconclusive. And again, he could not be detained because U.S. laws did not apply. He was released. The biggest theory about Amy was that she was taken off the ship and sold into sex trafficking. Amy was the kind of prey that was desirable. Ron and Brad flew back to Curacao on April 17th to search again and hold a news conference. I've stayed back and manned a command center they set up in their home with maps and information. They had a website going and set up a hotline for tips. And leads started to come in. A taxi driver approached Brad and Ron after their press conference to say a woman who looked just like Amy rushed up to him and asked for a phone. He pointed her to a phone bank, and she took off. He said Amy was on that island. He was sure of it. A Canadian man named David Carmichael said he and a friend were diving on an isolated beach on Curacao 5 months after Amy's disappearance. And he saw a woman walking on the beach with 2 men on either side of her. She approached Carmichael after she realized the 2 men spoke English. But the men with Amy were too controlling, and they pushed the woman away from Carmichael. He said he remembered the incident well because of the way the men glared at him. Otherwise, he would have just forgot about it. And 9 months later, when he was watching America's Most Wanted on TV, a segment featuring Amy's story was airing, and Carmichael said that was the woman he saw on the beach, right down to her tattoos. And he said one of the men with her looked just like Yellow. The FBI followed up but found nothing. Then in 1999, an American naval officer on leave from his ship said he visited a brothel in Curacao. A woman approached him for help, saying she was Amy Bradley, and she was being held against her will. Bill Hefner said Amy owed her captors drug money. Supposedly, Amy told him she left the ship on her own to score drugs, but was now stuck. The Bradleys didn't buy the drug story, but they do believe he saw their Amy. Hefner said he didn't do anything because he wasn't supposed to be in a brothel, and he waited 3 years to report the sighting, and by then the brothel had burned down. In 2005, a woman named Judy Maurer said she saw Amy in a public restroom in Barbados. Amy was with 3 men who were berating her about a deal that was going to go down that Amy didn't want to do. While alone in the restroom, the woman was quiet, but when asked, she said her name was Amy from Virginia. When the men came back in to collect Amy, she asked if they could stop and see the children, and the men said yes. What children was Amy talking about? Also in 2005, the Bradleys were sent an email with a picture of a sex worker advertised in a Caribbean magazine. The family was convinced it was Amy, and the FBI did a facial comparison on the photo and concluded it was most certainly Amy Bradley. Amy remains missing to this day, but she was legally declared dead in 2010. My thoughts. It seemed like the cruise line wanted the world to believe that Amy went overboard, but I think all the sightings of Amy are too much evidence, and I believe Amy was alive and taken off that ship and sold into the sex trade. I think Amy was targeted by the waitstaff and the band member Yellow. They drugged her and took her off the ship somehow, maybe in a large suitcase or a trash bin. The trash is taken off the ship at port. Even the linens are sometimes taken off and cleaned or swapped out. Amy would fit in one of those bins, and maybe the bins aren't checked very well at inspection points. Sex trafficking is big business in the Caribbean, generating $16 billion annually. The United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime reported about 4,300 victims in 2022 alone. In Latin America and the Caribbean, women are taken, kept drugged, and forced into sex slavery. It happens and it needs to stop. My biggest question is, why did Amy get up and leave the room again? Why? Why did she do it? Was it for a smoke? Did she plan to meet up with Yellow again? Did she bump into him accidentally? Cell phones and security cameras were much less widespread in 1998. The personnel on the ship should have done more to help the Bradleys out. But who knows how many crew members are aware of this sex ring or a part of it, the trafficking. There's a lot of money to go around. In 2010, Congress passed the Cruise Vessel Security and Safety Act. Basically, more security, surveillance, and training for crew members to handle missing persons on board. The FBI and the Coast Guard must be alerted if an American is involved. Railings must be at least 42 inches high. So the Netflix documentary I watched, it was really good. There were some things that I heard that weren't covered by the documentary, though. I read or heard that Yellow was seen giving Amy a dark liquid to drink when the two were sighted between 5:30 and 6 in the morning. This would lead one to believe that Amy was drugged. But who knows if it's true? I also read that non-paying passengers were allowed on board at ports sometimes to watch the entertainment. Is that protocol? Were passengers being assessed? Like who's a good target for a sex ring? The special also didn't mention that the Bradleys were victims of a massive scam to get their daughter back. It's a heartbreaking aspect to the story. And some things I learned after watching the special. I didn't know that Amy was gay. And it doesn't matter, but it was slightly alluded to that maybe that's why Amy might have jumped overboard. She didn't want to disappoint her parents. But there's no way this is true. Amy had so much to look forward to, and she was embracing herself, and her parents loved her dearly. Netflix producers also interviewed Yellow's own daughter, who called him for us to listen to during the show. Supposedly his wife uncovered a bag in his possession full of photos of women. Was he picking out the good ones? The theory that Amy went off the ship to get drugs, I just can't believe she would ever do something so dangerous. Most intriguing is, what did Amy mean, if that was Amy, when she said, "Can we go see the children?" in the restroom with Judy Maurer? Does Amy have children? Is that what her captors are holding over her head? Is that how they control the sex workers using their children? That makes sense. In 2018, Anthony Willis created the website amybradleyismissing.com. It's a catch-all for all the information regarding Amy's case, with lots of updated pictures of her family included. Traffic visiting the site was tracked, and a lot of those visits came from Curacao and Barbados, the last sighting of Amy. Was Amy checking out her own website, especially during the holidays and birthdays, to look at pictures of her family? Why wouldn't Amy then contact her family if she had access to a computer? Because maybe she has children, and they are threatened, and Amy is threatened by her captors if Amy ever tried to escape or leave, and she's forever trapped. I do think Amy's alive, and I hope they find her really soon. But here's another question I have. What happens to women in the sex trade when they get old? Amy would be about 50 years old right now. According to the United Nations Office on Crimes and Drugs, older women are moved to less desirable areas, or they become drug mules, or they're used to recruit newer and younger women. Or maybe, who knows, they're killed. It's certainly not a happily ever after ending, though, for them. After I watched the special, my heart ached for the Bradleys. I have a daughter about Amy's age when she disappeared. I hate it when she's alone, or walking, or in an Uber, or anywhere really, except home with me. My true crime obsession has made me a very overprotective mother. What do you think happened to Amy Bradley? Let me know in the comments and let's discuss it. I thank you so much for watching, and please like and subscribe and watch my other videos, and I'll be talking to you again real soon. Bye.